Hi, welcome to another episode of Stir Crazy. I'm here today with an amazing group of activists and organizers. Brittny Baxter, who's a DC consultant, educator, anti-racist activist, and voting rights specialist. We're here with Anthony Rogers Wright, who's currently in Portland, where he's been participating in the local protests over the past few days. And we have Darren Golden, who is one of the, well, I hesitate to use the word leader, but let's just say his hands have been involved in a lot of things in Portland over the last weeks and months, and he's here with us now. I am your host, Charles Lenchner. I'm filling in for Kim Brown, who was our usual host, and she will be back for our next episode. But let's get right to it. I'm so excited to have the three of you here with me today. The title of our episode is Portland Dispatch: What is the role of white people in the uprising? And just to be clear, this is not the most important question anyone could possibly come up with, but it has been put on the agenda by the president of the Portland NAACP, and I'm going to try not to get that wrong again, Mondenay. So my first question, which I'm going to give to, I'm going to send to the direction of Darren, is how do you see the question, the message, the op-ed in the Washington Post that Mondenay is coming from? How do you, as a street-level activist, understand his message and his political project?
Well, first, I want to say thank you for having me on, Charles. I appreciate it. Wow, how do I see his message? I believe, like a lot of the media that's going on right now, his message is a distraction as to what actually needs to occur. If anyone has paid attention to any civil rights movement or any movement in general where protests were involved, the protests are necessary to put the pressure on the political leaders to create the change that the people are asking for. So to come out and to talk about how protesters are demonstrating in any regard is removing focus from the political leaders who we are tasking and who we have elected to make these changes in general. So I think that all media that should be coming out shouldn't be on what the protesters aren't doing, but should be on how their actions are pressing on the actual elected leaders to create change or not create change, which we have seen.
Taking just a step back, I realized I want to read one of the quotes from his op-ed, where he writes, "We welcome our white brothers and sisters in the struggle. In fact, we need them. But I must ask them to remain humbly attuned to the opportunity of this moment and to reflect on whether any actions they take will truly help establish justice or whether they are simply for show." And it's a very interesting thing. I think what we need to do is remember the sentiment that he's expressing isn't just him. This is a conversation that we hear in organizing spaces among progressives and on the left. It's not that this, one man is saying something we don't like, related to strategy and tactics. This is a deeply felt sentiment. I want to turn to you, Anthony Rogers Wright. You've seen your share of protests and had to deal with a bunch of people that maybe you didn't think were acting right in those protests. Put this in a historical context. People of different races have been on the same side of the barricades for many, many years. So these conversations have been happening for many, many years. What's your frame for this right now?
Yeah, thank you so much, Charles. And it's really great to be on this panel. It's such an important discussion. What I would say, first and foremost, is that we have to distinguish between the 1960s civil rights epoch and the Black liberation epoch that we find ourselves in today. But even back in the 1960s, what we saw was we could not have achieved some of the things that we did without the presence of radical white people. Very, very important contributions. Even martyrs, people like Viola Luizzo and Mickey Schwerner and Andy Goodman. Now, while they were properly trained and received excellent training, their presence was really important. So I would go a step further than what the brother just stated about the head of the NAACP chapter in Portland. And specifically, what I would say is that one of the reasons.
Dwayne,
sort of mainstream is.
Hold on. Anthony, let me just interrupt you for a second. We lost about a minute.
Of course.
Can you restart? We lost
Yes. Yeah, and sorry about that because I am in transit right now, so I apologize to viewers. But all I was really saying was that we needed radical white people who were willing to take leadership from Black leadership, like Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, who ended up being martyrs. People like Viola Luizzo, Mickey Schwerner, and Andy Goodman, who were all killed in blood, basically standing up for Black liberation. And so what I would say about the comments of the NAACP Portland chapter is that the president of that chapter is that it's important to also understand that BLM came about because what happened to a lot of Black leadership is that it became ensconced in sort of what some people refer to as the petite bourgeois Negro sort of democratic establishment of incrementalism. And what we know right now is that incrementalism is not going to liberate Black lives. So, I would agree that we have to be careful that we're not using this moment to just boss white people around and to make them feel bad, especially ones who are putting their bodies on the line.
I'm going to turn now to you, Brittny. And I'm just wondering, you're in DC. I know that you've been in New York City and other places. The significance of ensuring that a protest movement that's about Black lives is fundamentally led by and accountable to Black people seems like a very reasonable thing that I haven't really seen any protester activists sort of challenge that idea, although I'm sure some that I'm not in touch with might have opened that door. But how do you fill that with meaning in a city like Portland that has 3% Black residents? And I'm imagining in my head all the sort of moments as an activist life where you raise your hand and no, you got to step back, or you have an opinion and you're told it's not on you to say that. And that's very different in New York City, which has a very thriving, robust activism scene, Black organizations, Black leaders. You're in Portland. How does that change things for you?
I think that's a great question. And the reality is, there is so much knowledge out there that folks should be seeking out, right? The reality is that there are too many articles, there are too many books, there's too much access to knowledge from Black thought leaders, from Black organizers, from folks who are striving for Black liberation that people can research on their own. And that's how they're constantly, you can be accountable by ensuring that you're constantly unlearning white supremacy, right? And it is checking in. You can reach out to the NAACP. You can reach out to the few Black folks who may exist in Portland, right? Find out and take your cues from them when you can. And when you can't, it's important to seek out and understand what's happening on a national level. I think it's also important to center what's happening now in a historical context. So folks need to be reading up on fight on the 60s, on the 70s, on the different movements that we've been fighting and the struggle that we've continued to be in this country, right? So I think that the one thing that I always ask of folks, and particularly white people, is that they are making sure that no matter what, they don't think that they've gotten to a place where they've fixed racism within themselves. They've won, right? Like they finished the race, right? This is and undoing white supremacy. And so that's my advice, that's my take on it. Make sure you're doing the research, the learning, and you're checking.
I'm sorry, your sound cut out just for a second. Could you say that last bit again?
Oh yeah. My thing is that, like, with everyone, right? Like me as a Black woman in America, I've internalized white supremacy myself, and in the same way that I hold myself accountable to undoing the racism and the white supremacy that I'm constantly internalizing, I demand at least that of white folks. They need to be constantly doing that by research, by having conversations, by reading the books, by reading books written by Black thought leaders, not just white folks. I think Robin DiAngelo is awesome. I think Auntie Jane Elliott is amazing, but there are plenty of Black folks who have shaped and influenced those ladies, and they need to be also reading from folks whose lived experiences are grounded in the theories that they've developed.
That's great. I want to turn back to you, Darren. You've been on the front lines, and I want to sort of depart away from what Mondane was saying in his op-ed. Is there anything you can tell us about your experience of the multiracial coalition on the streets of Portland? that would be interesting for us to know about? Maybe there's an incident that illustrates what that means in practice that we might not know from reading the mainstream reports.
I would say we marched for, I think it was 29 straight days, and every single day we had thousands of people showing up, mostly white people that were present, asking how they can be better, how they can do better, trying to follow Black leaders and understand what it was that was going on in the Black climate, the political climate. And this was not just, it's not just Black people. Rose City Justice, the organization, was not just Black people. It was Black led, but there were white allies. There were Middle Eastern individuals. There were Latin individuals, and all of these different people helped contribute to the movement in a whole. And in Portland, like you said, with such a small Black community, roughly 6 to 7%, if we don't begin to work with the white people of this community, we will not see any real change, because we will not get political change.
Fair enough. I'm going to ask Dwayne if you can, if that video is loaded up with the nurse. What we're seeing here, and it's not super easy, is that there's a woman wearing scrubs. She's being attacked by police as a result of trying to rescue someone else who's being tear gassed. And there she is, sort of scrambling away. And if you miss it, come back later and watch it more closely. But it's really interesting to see that, and then sort of ask a really weird question, which is, who are the stakeholders in that frame? How would you parse out the extent to which this is a movement in Portland of everyone who shows up for their internal motivations, and to what extent this is a movement of, by, and for Black people against violence, against racism, in which the only role permitted for white people is to be allies and to practice allyship. And I ask that not because I haven't heard lots of answers, but I just think that when you see these scenes of violence, you don't necessarily see a division into two groups. You see everyone acting together as one. Darren, we'll start with you.
There is no, when you get hit with tear gas, when you get hit with pepper spray, there's no division. Everybody's on the front lines when they're down there. It doesn't matter what the color of your skin is. And it will probably never matter to any of those individuals who have been down to the front lines to experience that. And it was the same way for me in the military. It literally did not matter what color you were, because you were under attack from an oppressive force, or you were training in whatever realm you were to deal with a individual who is pressing violence upon you. When it comes to violence, everybody is going to come together to speak out or step up against violence. And that's what we're seeing here in large part. I think that the media has done a great job at not showing that it's white, Black, Latin, X, whatever has come together to actually make this movement what it is. And yeah, it's nurses, doctors, drug dealers, everybody is the same when it comes to stepping out and speaking out against the violence that we're experiencing here in Portland and historically as well.
Right. Anthony, do you want to address this point? Because I'm thinking of you. Sorry, I'm thinking of you because you are a very articulate spokesperson for how white progressives are often creating damage and harm within the environmental or climate movement. You are very vocal about how, you got to be careful in what you say and what you know. And I feel like in this conversation, you're taking a slightly different tack. And I'm trying to understand why you're not being the voice of, stay in your lane.
I appreciate that. That's an interesting juxtaposition. And what I would say is that what's happening in the streets, what makes it different is that it has nothing to do with an organization. This is not a nonprofit industrial complex type of situation, whereas the environmental apparatus is, littered with it, unfortunately. What I would add is that, having been hit by pepper bullets and tear gas, and an agent that some people are saying was way stronger than tear gas in the last 2 days. When I found myself on my knees, unable to move, it was white street medics who were right there, making sure that I could see, making sure that I could breathe, making sure that I got everything that I needed. So what I would say to that is that, like, there's a difference between, white leadership and centering white leadership, right? And I would say that, like, bad leadership is any type of leadership that censors itself or that particular leader anyway, regardless of their race. What has made this moment a bit different for me, and I totally agree with everything that Sister Brittny said, is that, yes, you have to do the research, listen to what SNCC said about the role of white folk in the basis of Black Power in 1968. Literally, that's what white people are doing right now. SNCC said, go to the neighborhoods where racism is most pronounced, which is the white neighborhoods. Well, it's pretty easy to do that in Portland, and that's kind of what we're seeing happening. And I think that the reason why we've really sort of triggered or piqued the interest of DC and the power structure there is because after Breonna Taylor and George Floyd were assassinated by the state, it was as if there was this instantaneous, not just sympathy from white people, but empathy. And that's what got them in the streets. And that's literally what scared the crap out of potentially the power structure, the oligarchs, the capitalists in our government, because what they had successfully had done by offering what Du Bois and Roediger referred to as the wages of whiteness was a level of division of even poor white folk, Appalachian white folk, not standing in solidarity with poor Black folk. That's coming to an end now, and for me, I'm all for it. So it's a lot different, and that's why we are seeing so much. Probably we have seen so much great change happening is because this struggle has been led by principled struggle in the street, not funders and an organization and the comms director and the executive director. And I think that's what makes it so different than what we see in environmental space.
What I'm taking from you is that one of the things that's not been given prominence is this dividing line between what a movement looks like in the streets, raw, untamed, you get all kinds of weirdos out there, and they're great too, versus the kind of controlled movements that you can get a budget for in advance. And that's a completely different thing, and that's where the sort of you take one stance for one thing and a bit of a different one on the other.
No, that I think you hit the nail on the head, brother. Like that's it exactly. Is that what I was sometimes even saying was, I came to Portland, Seattle is home, to kind of get an outlet from my normal nonprofit shop, right? It was just that, like, I needed something more organic, something more real, and something more raw, and not have to worry about if I was going to offend a funder or anything like that. And so it's been a lot more fruitful.
Thank you. Brittny, you are in the belly of the beast, I'm sorry to say, being based in DC. This is where all the big decisions that oppress us are made, right? So what's your take on that division? And be careful, because you do work for some parts of a nonprofit, possibly industrial, complicated thing.
I don't need to be that careful. I think that several things are happening, right? I think that white people are coming to a reckoning with the reality that white supremacy is not only violent and deadly to Black people, it is also costing them lives, their livelihoods. It is financially costing them and their families, and people as a whole, in this perfect storm that has been created by this pandemic, the mishandling of this pandemic, this financial crisis that followed soon after, and then the violent murders and lack of justice for Breonna Taylor, for Ahmaud Arbery, for George Floyd, and the list goes on, right? This is causing people to pay attention to what is happening around them, and there's a sense of accountability that wasn't there before, because people were it was easier for them to make faces, but because all of us are now at a level of desperation and with a level of fear some of us have not experienced. There is
I'm sorry.
Part of my Pentecostal.
Sound's not working right.
Sorry.
That's okay. No. I'm just making a note. Right now, we're not hearing you well, so we got to stop and turn to someone else. But we're going to come back to you.
Okay,
so hold that thought. Thank you. If we could, as a kind of I don't know, it's not quite a unicorn chaser, but Dwayne, can you play that clip number 3 for us?
You can't breathe. You can't breathe. You can't breathe. You can't breathe. I can't breathe.
So that,
I cannot breathe. Let her go. Please let her go, sir.
I just think that's
Why?
going to last as one of the most amazing images. A white woman pinned on her back with DHS troops kneeing her, yelling out that she can't breathe. I just wonder if there's what can be said about this. And I'm going to turn to Brittny first.
Why? Answer! Why? Why?
This is exactly what I was talking about. White supremacy is costing the lives of white folks.
So I don't know if my question became clear. Brittny, I mean, you're seeing that image. What an interesting juxtaposition for the Black Lives Matter movement to see a white woman pinned down with the knees of goddamn DHS militia movement troops screaming out, "I can't breathe." So part of where I'm going with this is it possible that some aspect of this is actually a movement by Americans, period, for things that Americans would like, not to have terror, not to have the military behave like this, not to have cops shoot people in the streets. It is a Black-centered movement. It needs to stay that way. But goddamn, a lot of white people are now getting super invested in the struggle right now. Brittny, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that there have been white people who have always been invested in this movement. I mean, recently in Houston, there was a white protester who was concealed carrying legally and was shot to death while pushing his fiance along in a wheelchair. And I'm disgusted by this because I think that what I don't think we should do is separate Black Lives Matter from what's happening right now, because it is really the energy around Black Lives Matter and the work that has been happening since the murder of Trayvon Martin that has prepared and primed America for what is happening now. Black Lives Matter is centering the lives of Black people in a fight against capitalism, against patriarchy, against racism, for the liberation of all of us. I've always been told by the Black women who have schooled me and trained me as an organizer is that if we lift up and elevate and focus and solve the problems of Black people in America, it automatically transforms the way that this economy, this country works for everyone. So that's my perspective.
Thank you. I want to turn to you, Darren, but before I do, I'm seeing a comment from the YouTube channel chiding me, the host, for impugning that DHS folks are with the military. If you're working for the DHS, you're not the military. Military is actually looking a lot better in this moment than DHS or police departments are. Darren, what have you got to give us?
Could you just clarify exactly what you want again?
Yeah, sorry about that. I guess what I'm coming at is that when we look at the landscape of police behavior in the United States, or what people want for this country, I think that a few years ago when Black Lives Matter started, and the history of campaigns against lynching, against police violence, I think that there has never been such a large component of white people who are presenting not to help others, but out of a sense that this is their fight as well. And I think that's a complicating fact that I think just doesn't come out in the discourse enough.
Yeah, I mean, I liken this, the BLN movement of 2016 to the BLN movement of today, very much to the war on drugs and the crack epidemic versus the opioid epidemic of today. Previously, white people were saying, well, don't break the law. Black people are getting, shot and arrested at high rates because they break the law more than anybody else. We know that's not true. It's never been true. We've always had facts that have shown that's not true. But now they are seeing this happen to white people. You are seeing federal agents occupy the largest white city in the nation. And the white people are saying, oh, this is not about race for the government. We are going to respond out of violence because you are now anti-capitalist by supporting this movement, because this movement says, hey, we want equity. We want everyone to be respected. That's obviously not what the government wants. It's never what the government has wanted. The oppressor cannot be efficient unless they have someone to oppress. If Black people are liberated, everyone is liberated, and then the government has no idea what to do anymore. I think that's what we're seeing a lot of right now, and that a lot of white people are understanding that it's not just one who is parallel to Black people. It's anyone who speaks up for Black people. It's anyone who just decides to join in and help out regarding the BLM movement at all.
That's a great segue to, and I'm making a note for Dwayne, we're going to skip to number 5. There's this article that I read. It's kind of long on Monthly Review Online called "Anatomy of a Counterinsurgency," and it's discussing this issue from the perspective of the government or police departments who are using an actual counterinsurgency manual developed by the military and originally authored by David Petraeus as a way to understand how the authorities are dealing with this. A counterinsurgency is different than a war, or different than just the tactical engagement, because the goal is to defeat your enemies politically. And in the case of an insurgency, we are the enemy that must be defeated for the power system to remain whole. We collectively, as the citizens of America, if we are not buying into the narrative of the authorities, what we're doing is we're undermining the legitimacy of our government in some way. And so the response to it from the government is going to be, how can they advance reasonable people who understand the urgency of the situation, but who are always ready to offer something less that you could do, something that the power structure is better able to deal with, and then use those responsible agents to isolate and marginalize the forefront of the struggle, the folks that are in the protests and that are using slogans like abolish the police or defund the police. Darren, I wonder how you experience that sense of being the victim or recipient of a counterinsurgency strategy. What are you seeing in the media or from the way that government officials, elected officials are behaving that helps you see the way in which you are being, counterinsurgency?
In which I've been counterinsurgency.
Yeah, you many others are something to be neutralized because you're a threat to the system right now. What does that feel like?
I have been a part of the system that oppresses American imperialism throughout the rest of the nation because I was just unaware as a kid when I was in the military. I'm seeing so much more now, and even while I was in, the issues that exist and why counterinsurgency happens. The military protects capitalist interests. It's that bottom line. That's the way the U.S. government works, and the military is a big part of that. Not to mention, not that they don't have peaceful missions, but I think propaganda is the biggest aspect of all of this. I think that the U.S. government is very good at creating a story or a picture for the general public to view in which, just completely dismisses the narrative that we're out here simply asking. We're not even asking for equity. We're asking for equal. Black people just wanted to be treated the same. We're not even at the reparations conversation. We're saying, hey, just treat us the same. Don't shoot us in cold blood. Don't kneel on our necks until we die. Don't, all of these things that are happening to Black people at a rate much higher than anybody else. That's what's going on. And the fact that the media is moving away from that purposely is what I think is the biggest issue that we're facing here.
I'm gonna read now a quote from that Anatomy of a Counterinsurgency. True to form, the Star Tribune, which is the main newspaper of Minneapolis, printed a call for peace from the family and partner of George Floyd, as well as from the political, faith, and community leaders calling for an end to riots. That story was particularly interesting because the group of leaders was called together by Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. It included church leaders and NGO managers. Here's an example of a top state official picking and choosing who counts as a community leader without direct input from the community. In turn, the Star Tribune reported on the meeting, treating these externally handpicked community leaders as though their legitimacy derived from the community itself. Now, what this is picking on is the fact that there's a gap between what's happening on the streets, what's happening on social media, and what's happening among the smaller, but perhaps with more access to resources group of community leaders who thrive to the extent that they're part of the system in place and who risk a lot if they cross that line. And I just want to turn to you, Anthony, again, and sort of ask, how do you see that divide manifesting in your world?
Yeah, this is a really important question. I mean, because I'm thinking that like it's really interesting to me just in listening to both of these other brilliant guests, in that it's ironic that some of who I would consider the matriarchs and the purveyors of the Black radical tradition, Ella Baker and of course Angela Davis, who always have said that, we're not just struggling for the liberation of the Negro, or Angela Davis saying we're not just struggling for the liberation of Black people, but for all oppressed people. And so it's just kind of ironic. And again, not trying to be disrespectful to any Black leaders specifically, but that there seems to be more complaints about the presence and white people being on the front lines, quite frankly, for more centrist elements of Black leadership, right? And you have to ask yourself, yeah.
Continue. I didn't
one more time.
No, continue.
Okay, yeah, and I'm just, that to me, is very, very interesting, because even with respect to environmental justice and climate justice, right? Environmental justice is, they are our foremothers and forefathers who coined the phrase environmental racism. And then the climate justice movement came out of that. So it's sort of more in the, late 90s, early 2000s. The climate justice movement is really more divorced from neoliberalism than the environmental justice movement. So it's in terms of my work, I always, one, is it a generational thing, or is it really just a choice of, do you believe that neoliberalism can actually be efficacious? Or are you more sort of like me in the climate justice circles, or like neoliberalism is adding to the oppression that it includes the intersecting crises of climate crisis, as Brittny was saying, heteropatriarchy, and of course white supremacy. So your question, it provokes a lot of other questions, but what is clear is that it's very interesting that the more radical aspects, whether it's climate justice or Black liberation, seem to really get this need for class solidarity and not drawing a line dividing class and race, but drawing lines connecting the two. And again, that's what I think that we saw in Portland, was just like, hey, this is ridiculous. And this military, as Dwayne was saying, is oppressing all of us. And if we don't come together, we're either going to find ourselves further divided and fractured, and that gives them even more efficacy to really keep suppressing us.
I'm hearing, I'm going to be asking you a question, Brittny, but I'm hearing Anthony sort of articulate out loud that there's an issue within African-American politics between centrists and non-centrists. And I'm hearing this, and I'm realizing that, as a white person who's also an activist, if I talk about race in a certain way, then I'm stepping outside my lane. If I address the class commonalities, then I'll be accused of being a race reductionist. I'm not sure what the right way to navigate that terrain is, Brittny, and I think you're a really good person to give me some instructions. I wish I could see your face now.
Well, I think this is what I tell white people all the time, and I believe in practicing radical honesty. There are some things that are not your lane, and it's important also the way that you approach having these conversations, right? Like, there are things that you can't speak of that we can have. There are conversations that we can have, right? So like I come out of a Pentecostal household. And so I spent my life around super religious folks who were somewhat closed-minded, right? Homophobic, and a lot of the other things that are completely opposite of who I am and how I identify as an individual today. And I think that what happens is, like, there are conversations that need to have, like my mama used to say, at the kitchen table with the family, and there are conversations that need to happen outside. And so some of these things have to be left to Black folks to handle on our own, which we are capable of. And you have to make sure that you're not stepping up to call out Black folks because you feel like you have to in a paternalistic way, right? Like, you can call someone out and hold them accountable. And I think there's a really good example of this. A friend of mine called into question a conversation, something that was said by an elected in New York about gentrifiers sweeping the elections, right? But this was someone who paved the way for gentrification to happen in her district. And this was a Black woman. But then we saw white folks, white liberals jumping in and attacking this Black woman. And he had to follow up with, excuse me, this is not how you talk to Black women. Stay in your lane. I'm having a conversation with her. I'm addressing her as a constituent, as someone who's holding her accountable. Watch your mouth, because there's plenty of us who will get you too, right? Like it's a balance of knowing where it's appropriate and how it's appropriate to have a conversation. And I think like if you find yourself attacking or criticizing someone or calling into question their qualifications, doing things that you wouldn't say to a white person who had made the same decision, then maybe you should just be quiet. And it's important to have those conversations, to connect with Black and brown folks who have those relationships, right? Like, because trust me, we are internally having these conversations about our aunties and uncles who just are a little too close to the right wing for our liking, but that's our place to do that because that's our family.
This is a conversation that's not going to stop. It's going to continue. And I feel in a way that the way we're having it now on this show is sort of so different than the experience that many people have when they're actually in the struggle, going to meetings, and it's a little bit more messy there. But I want to turn our attention now, and if Dwayne, you could load up number 6. I'm looking at this announcement from a new group from Denver called the Wall of Moms, and what they've done is taking the inspiration from Portland moms who organized the original Wall of Moms. They created a group. It's growing. They have a lot of volunteers. People want to be plugged in. The admins, the technical term for the folks running the Facebook page and group, are basically saying, hey, we're only white people here as admins, but we'd like to replace ourselves with Black leaders. We are actively seeking to no longer perform the technical function of being an admin in this group and have Black people, Black women in this case, because it's moms, take our place. I have rarely seen a public appeal of this nature in such an explicit way. To me, it comes across as extremely well-meaning. Like whatever this group is, they are serious about the struggle. But I wonder if something about the nature of this, what does this say about how we understand leadership in communities and struggles that are absolutely white dominated? Darren?
There's never been a chance for us to even see something remotely like this. And I think I'm not a mom, nor am I a woman, so I don't even know if this is my place to talk about how they move and operate. But I think that it is a great step towards other white allies asking how they can help. And following the Wall of Moms and how they reached out to Black women in the community and Black leaders in the community and said, hey, we have this platform. We want you to know that this platform is your platform. And we would love for you to be the one to be the admin, essentially, to be the leader, for us to remain as a force and as a apparatus, as a tool, essentially, and for the Black women in the community to be the individual who uses the tool. And I think that is a great way to show that white allyship is, in this very instance, doing what it should in a Black movement and becoming a tool for Black individuals to use.
Without expressing any disagreement, I think there's a difference here. The Wall of Moms in Portland, by your account and others, was a group, vastly of a white group, although it's very diverse itself, basically understanding that collectively they needed a relationship with other Black organizations or political leadership, and it was conducted on that level. But in this case, it looks like there's a risk of tokenization, of saying, we're not sure who you are when, could we just have some different complexion people come in here and be our admins for us? That doesn't feel like the same kind of mature political understanding of what leadership is in these two instances?
It's a start.
Well, I think that it is a start. And I think that on top of relinquishing control of, the Wall of Moms group, I think it's important for Black leaders and also those moms in their own accord to hold themselves accountable going a step further. A lot of those individuals work at organizations that are hiring people or have the ability to influence change within their community regarding economic opportunities and growth. So I would then ask, hey, Wall of Moms, what are you doing in your professional world outside of what's going on in the protest world to actually progress and move forward the Black community or the Indigenous community? How are you offering jobs? How are you making sure individuals are compensated for their time? How are you making sure that your code of conduct at work makes and helps and ensures that individuals are not being racist, and if they are being racist or sexist, et cetera, are being held accountable? So it's a chance to go a step further while relinquishing control within the movement and on the front lines. The real work happens in the workplace. The real work happens in the policy rooms. And that's where they have to go and take a step forward and go and not ask Black leaders how to do that, because the research is out there. Don't ask us to do that if you're not compensating us for that. If you do want to compensate us, call me up. I'm a consultant. I'll help you out. But don't ask people to do it for free.
Fair enough. Brittny, you're the only mom on this show. So what are your thoughts?
So I'll say two things, right? The first is I just have a lot of love and admiration for the Wall of Moms and the dads with the leaf blowers. As a parent, it's really, it's powerful to see white parents stepping up in a way, because it's finally a signal that they too want to protect the bodies of Black children who don't have innocence, who aren't seen as children in this country. And that's a really powerful shift in the way that we look at power, right? And so the second thing is, like, I think that there are two ways that this can go, right? If we want to uphold the same power structures that exist in the nonprofit industrial complex, we can have those conversations about replacing gatekeepers with other gatekeepers, or we can talk about ways that we can transform the way that we do this work so that we don't have to have those conversations anymore. And I know that's really far off, and that asking people to not breathe the air the same way they used to, because these power structures are embedded in who and how we identify and see the world and how we understand how the world works.
Thank you for that.
Us. And so that kind of transformation and shift is going to take a lot of time, energy, and intentional work. And it's going to be uncomfortable. Folks just have to not let this moment be a moment. It needs to be turned into, that energy needs to be transferred into a movement that is sustaining.
Thank you, Brittny. I'm turning to you now, Anthony. This story about the Wall of Moms in Portland, which is very inspirational, and just to be clear, it's also inspirational what the Denver moms are doing. Is there some kind of development in the history of the modern activist movement that is unfolding here? Are you changing your mind in any way about how white progressives and allies can be used, can be allied with on the basis of these actions?
Yeah, no, this is also an example, again, right, of what we were talking about between, as Darren was saying, of sort of like your organization and then what you're doing, in the streets. So I think that the moms did offer a model that, quite frankly, as you also know, Charles, and I think everyone else, recently there's been lots of discussions about the white supremacy that's existed in the environmental community since the Sierra Club, came into fruition when they were founded by a white supremacist who, referred to indigenous folk as dirty people. And during the proclamation of we're going to stand for movement for Black lives, a lot of environmental groups embraced all of that. The question, as Brittny just said, became, what is the internal work that you're doing? The external work of saying F white supremacy and whatever woke culture calls for on the outside is very, very easy. I think what the moms did is something that a lot of environmental groups have not done or not willing to do, and to understand that diversity is not just about numbers, it's also about shared power. and it's also about a function of power. So, in other words, just because, you take a country like South Africa, for instance, it's a very diverse country. Israel, a very diverse country, but who has all the power? At the same time, I really appreciate what you brought up, Charles, of these processes have to be intentional, because sometimes tokenization can happen unconsciously and consciously, and that just means having intentional discussions and sitting down and saying, like, we don't just want any Black or brown person, now taking this over. We want someone who agrees with our analysis, who agrees with, that's not a capitalist or neoliberal analysis, because we all know what happens when you put Black people in power who have bad politics.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm just thinking in my head, what would happen if I ever said what you just said in a meeting?
I mean, you and I would probably have to run, and get to a secure place so that we could explain ourselves.
Right. Fair enough. I want to say this has been a really great discussion, and I want to kind of end it on a high inspirational note. But before that, we're going to ask a complicated question. Imagine a scenario where in 10 years, no Black people are being killed by the police. Just none. Number goes down to 0. I know it's a crazy thing. Okay. But imagine that also almost nothing else changes. What would that mean?
I think that's impossible, because the police are here to protect property. And when you have desperate people with no economic power, no influence, you're going to see rising crime. And I'm not saying this is not that Blackness this is an impoverishing, this is a lack of resources, this is a lack of access to basic social nets, right? You can't have and uphold this system without the police, right? They're the bulldogs, they're the dogs that you sick on folks who aren't holding their own and allowing you to commodify their bodies and their labor. So it's not like, I don't see, you can't have one without the other. Like, I don't see a world where that is possible.
But can you see a world where we advance on the defund police agenda? The compromises that will be made between the radicals and the centrists and legislators and we move all that. Is that going to change the lives of, say, low-income people working at McDonald's, who are in large part people of color and women? I mean,
yes. If defunding the police means shifting those resources to universal health care and to other resources in the community, so their kids can have somewhere safe to play, so that they're not playing in the street, they're playing in a park that is maintained, that they have access to. They have after-school resources. They have lunches that they're providing. Absolutely, it will transform the lives of folks, because people who are suffering that much, it doesn't take much to change a situation, right? You provide basic childcare, it transforms a mother's life. You provide basic access to quality transportation that's affordable, you transform a family's life. You give them those basic things are steps to pull themselves out of poverty, which is why they don't have access to them. Because if we provide access to those types of basic resources, then the number of people who are in poverty would dramatically change, because they would have access to the resources to provide a stable income for their families and improve their lives.
Darren, is that how you see it too? That these two lanes are actually one lane, and it wouldn't even make sense to imagine one moving forward without the other?
I think it would be stupid to waste our time imagining one without the other. I'm done dreaming small. That's all I've got to say on that.
Fair enough. Anthony?
I agree with my esteemed colleagues. I think that we are on the other side of peak incrementalism and peak neoliberalism. And just quickly to what Brittny said, this is why we should see more environmentalists getting down with defund the police, because it's no different than their aspirations to divest from the fossil fuel industry and reinvest into the regenerative economy. The regenerative economy includes Black people and care work, and certainly our children. So it's right around, it's like along the same lines.
That's great. We're going to move now to our closing segment, which is meant to be optimistic and give us a little bit of spiritual soul fire for the struggle ahead. Can each of you say something, and we'll start with Brittny. What about this moment gives you the most hope?
what gives me the most hope is that this perfect storm is happening at the perfect time in history, right? People have been pushed to their limits and they're deciding to stand up and not be the table that the deals are cut at, right? And so I think that if we do this right, if we harness this power and teach folks about collective power in the ways that power can manifest outside of the transactional ways that we typically see it in our society, we can affect some real change that will sustain us going forward. And that gives me hope for my son. That gives me hope for, this generation, because we haven't figured out how to prevent the world from collapsing before the next generation. That's what I have hope for, is that we don't waste this moment. We use it to unite along and across dividing lines.
Thank you, Brittny. Anthony?
Yeah, I would say that my hope is sort of rooted in the way that the great author Rebecca Solnit, our good sister who coined the phrase mansplaining, talks about hope being active. You can't, it's not a lottery ticket that you can sit on the couch and clutch or feel lucky. That she says hope is an axe you break down the doors with during an emergency, and hope is something that should shove you out the door. So to that sense, what I'm seeing from our white comrades is hope in the form of active empathy. And I'm hoping that, like, now that just everything has been elucidated with COVID, with the climate crisis, with racial injustice, with misogyny and patriarchy. And it's like, you can go back or just kind of like be cool with the status quo, or we can do something together that's extremely revolutionary and transformational. And it seems that people are sort of leaning to the latter and understanding also that it's not just Trump that we have to defeat, it's Trumpism.
Thank you. And we're going to close with you, Darren. Tell us where the hope is now.
My hope is with change. My hope is aligning with the fact that white people have finally showed up to fight for Black people, and they have shown that they're, at least for the near future, they're not going anywhere, that they are willing 100% to put their bodies on the line. And it's something that I can't stress enough as a Black person. It means so much to every other Black person in the world that white people are willing to show up for us in this way. And I'm just hopeful that that's going to continue, and that, as we know, white people control the levers of power in this world, and that finally we can begin to work towards collaboration and creating a better America.
Thank you so much.
I did have one last thing to say.
Yes.
The individual, we weren't able to discuss it. The individual, Andre Miller, who was hit in the head with riot munitions in Portland, marched with us for 29 straight days. And he was a part of the Guardians team providing protection for the individuals at the marches. And after all of that fell apart, and now he's at the Justice Center protesting his standing up for his city. But he was hit with riot munitions and went to the hospital and was gravely injured. And if you look up just Andre Miller, common spelling, Portland, Oregon, check out his GoFundMe page, contribute if you can. That would be amazing. He's a Black man putting himself on the line every single day.
We will put up the link to that GoFundMe, the places where this show appears online. Thank you for that.
Awesome.
So we're going to close out here, but I want to remind all of our viewers, we are paying attention to your comments on Twitter, on the comments page on YouTube. We are paying attention to the need for this kind of information. We hope that you will follow, subscribe, support, donate, do what you can to get this information, this analysis and commentary out there. We think it matters, and you matter too. On behalf of Stir Crazy, thank you and good evening.